Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Let's do some pod crashing. Episode number 295 is with Mosi Secret from the podcast Radical. Mosi, I got to tell you, man, I love what you are doing with this podcast in the way that we don't know the story. We know the headlines. We may have heard about it, but we don't know how you are breaking this down to where we have a better picture of the reality of the streets of Atlanta.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. People have a lot of surprises in store in the show.
Well, how do you get so many people to be so open? Because they're saying things. I'm going, oh my God, how did he even ask that question? How did it even come up?
Yeah, these were very sensitive conversations, and I think it was a combination of factors. It was, experience as a journalist, but it was also access to this community. I grew up around these folks. My family grew up around these folks. So I was dealing with people where there was already kind of this baseline trust. And I think that there's also just something of human nature where people want their stories to get out and they want the truth to get out. So, these factors work together to hopefully kind of create this great chemistry in an interview.
Well, I live by the mantra, share your story or someone will write it for you. And I swear to God that you step right into that because you're allowing them to share their story. And it's not you that's going, okay, well, this is what I heard.
Yeah, we're sitting down with people and we're having these intimate conversations. And it's not really my way to interrupt or to question anybody. I really want to get their perspective. And what you find is that people are very close to things that happen, or they have things on their mind or on their chest that they want to get off. And you, in doing that and piecing these various conversations together, you get closer to some kind of truth.
As that interviewer and journalist, isn't your favorite part of having those conversations when you do step back and just sit there and listen for the afterthought?
Yeah, there's just so much meaning that could happen. It's the case for all of us. There's so much meaning that could happen when you really just listen to somebody else. But in these moments, we are piecing things together, and there will be these kind of aha moments where, both of us sitting together will kind of come to some type of mutual understanding that is really nice.
You paint a picture of the city of Atlanta in a way that I've never, ever heard it before. And you talk about the West Side. I'm going, the West Side? I know of Spaghetti Junction. Everything down there is pecan this and pecan that, but the West Side. So I love the way that you really let us know what that's about.
Yes, it was, like Atlanta is one of these cities that has so much history, going all the way back to, the Civil War. And the west side of Atlanta was this area that had been quite well-to-do, these beautiful bungalows, Victorian homes, and eventually fell on quite hard times. It became infested with drug addiction and prostitution and things like that. And the central figure in this case, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, comes and he somehow cleans up this neighborhood and establishes a community of Muslims. And so people who are not familiar with that history will learn a lot about this side of Atlanta and what this man was able to do for it.
You use the term Black Panther before. Did it even become a group before? Because, it feels like that you set us up as listeners of going, oh, my God, here we go. Malcolm X is right around the corner.
He is one of these towering figures, and I'm speaking about Jamil Al-Amin, but in his youth he was known as H-Rap Brown. Mm-hmm. He's one of these towering figures of the 20th century civil rights movement, working alongside the leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and his name was uttered in the same breath as Malcolm X. And you're right, he, after that period of his life, transitioned and became this guy in the neighborhood. He was this guy who was the one who was around the corner. And it would be like, I grew up around this, and it was interesting to know that this guy walking around the city in west side of Atlanta had embodied all of this history.
Mm. One of the things that you do so well, and I would love to know if it's in the writing or if it's in your inflection, in the way that you describe that shooting that's taking place, where the gunfire was continuous and they were hiding inside the house. As I was driving in the car, I'm going, oh my God, my anxiety is going through the roof right now. So what is it, in the writing or is it in your inflection, the way that you just perfectly pace that thing out, that part of the story?
You know, I think it's the writing and the inflection, but I should say, for all of my colleagues who worked on this, that I am not doing this alone. So, like there's a producer who's helping me with the pacing. I'm reading the script, and I'll go back and read it again because he says this part was too fast, or I want you to hit this thing. And so that's a big part of it. And also my producer and I, his name is Johnny Kaufman, we were writing this together, and it was very much kind of trial and error, doing this over various iterations until we found what felt like it worked. And it's really interesting to be together in this whole, really, and then to emerge with something and realize that what you have done together is actually connecting with people. So that's kind of how we did it, but you don't really know how it's going to land until you put it out into the world.
Experiencing Radical, I feel like that we need to have this more in conversations, because I'm here in the South as well. And you know how we are in the South. There are things we don't talk about. I think this is a story we need to be talking about. This is the reality, and it would help a lot of people understand the connection of a community that seems to be hidden, but it's there.
Yeah, I think you're so right about people in the South not really talking about things or confronting things head on, and this story was the case on many sides. So we're just to give you a little bit more background, or to give listeners a little bit more background. This shootout that the show is about followed, let's say, decades of a kind of a secret surveillance by the FBI of this man, Jamil Al-Amin. So there are those secrets. There in the community where this happens, there were all these people who kind of started, let's just say, the drug dealers in the community started losing their lives. And there were secrets as to why that was happening. I'll leave it there. So people are holding on to these things. And then if you look beyond that immediate community and beyond this case, people have not necessarily faced the ramifications of what this community meant and what this shooting meant. People have kind of moved on. And so I think it's time for a return. Being
on your side of the microphone, when somebody admits, yeah, I shot in the air. We all shot. I'm going, what the hell? It was kind of scary. It's so, we think today is such a rough world, but look at the world that you had back there in 2000 that you're journalizing on right now. It was just as rough.
Yeah. One of the funny things is when people are that close to anything really, but in this case to that level of violence, you get used to it, or you don't necessarily realize that there's something else. And so people were quite close to really horrific things happening that they only could see with either the distance of time or from an outsider's perspective, like someone like me coming in. But there were really crazy things that happened.
I'm so afraid to talk about the story because I want listeners to experience it the way that I experienced it. Because when you hear it and you're going through the emotion that you're sharing, if we sit here and we spoil it, I think that's going to take away from it. But I will say, though, I love the way that you set up the date. And that's such a radio term. In other words, you'll break in the story. You'll say something and you'll say, but we're going to cover that in a little bit. And I'm going, oh, my God, he totally set up the date.
Yeah, there are so many suspenseful moments. What happened the night of the shooting? How was the FBI pursuing him? Mm-hmm. What was Jamil Al-Amin up to in the neighborhood? What were people around him doing? There's just so much. What does this mean for our understanding of the lengths that government will go to catch someone? There's a lot in there.
Especially, I like the transition when he became more spiritual, becoming Muslim. I mean, I love the way that you explain that in a way so that we all understand how people grow within their own spiritual beliefs.
Yeah. There was this moment for him where he'd been on the front lines of the civil rights movement. Yep. And had been, really under fire for his pretty radical ideas, and he turned inward and turned. He wanted to find some other type of salvation, and we see this happening a lot for people who are at these low points. He was in prison when this conversion happened, but it was really a kind of a moment that many of us come to in our lives when we are ready for a really fundamental change.
Mm-hmm. The music is a huge star of this. I mean, how did you select the music for this? Was it local musicians or production library? Because, I mean, whoever put the music in there really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, thank you. So there were two composers who were working on the show, and the story that I like to tell is about one of them, whose name is Ray Murray. He's one of the producers of a very famous production group called Organized Noise behind Outkast and Goody Mob and Ludacris and TLC. We wanted to have a certain sound for this show. We wanted it to sound like the West Side of Atlanta in the 90s and the early 2000s. And for people from Atlanta, that means one thing or maybe two things: Outkast and Goody Mob. And so we through these kind of random connections that we have today, because the world is so small, we were able to get in touch with their producer, and we learned that not only was he from this part of Atlanta, but that he had family roots in the Black Panther Party and was interested in these issues. And then we kept talking, and he was like, "Oh yeah, and I chose an African name for myself, and the name I chose for myself was Mosi." And so at that point, we just felt like there was some type of fate that we were supposed to bring his music in.
Yep.
And so we went to his studio and started listening to beats, and the rest is history. We found this great soundtrack for the show.
Well, Atlanta has its own sound anyway. I mean, my God, you can go into any club down there and go, "Yep, I'm in Atlanta. I feel it."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Atlanta is, since I was in high school, like in the 90s, Atlanta has been driving the hip hop sound. And even outside of hip hop, indie music, it has its own feel.
I always say it's in the soil, because I mean, it's just to go down there and experience it is like New Orleans with their jazz. It's in the soil.
Yeah, in that red clay.
Yeah, I know it all too well. So, like, when you put an episode together, are you part of the editing process? Because, I mean, I'd be one of those people. I'd be in that room going, "Okay, I like that, but we need to take this out," because there's so much of this story. How did you, because we live in this Twitter generation. How were you able to put it in such a simple but very stunning way?
Yeah, so I love these kinds of questions about craft and structure. The producer who I was working with, his name is Johnny Kaufman, and he is someone who is much more experienced than I in audio work. I'm primarily a print journalist. I mostly write for magazines. And so our process was Johnny would write out a draft saying, "This is where the music's going to go, this is where the tape's going to go, and this is where your voice is going to go." And I would come back behind and I would write in my voice, and then we would trade it back and forth. And we would come to some type of draft that we liked, and then we would go before some of our other colleagues and do what we call a table read, where we would read them the show and play the tape along with it, and they would give their feedback. And together through this process over a period of months, we came to what listeners are hearing now.
Are you going to do any more stories about the Atlanta area? Because, I mean, it really is a hidden gem. We know of the history of Atlanta, but you know a deeper, more in-depth history of Atlanta.
I mean, you never know. There is so much. There's so much there in Atlanta. It's the city where, since the Civil War has been a center of commerce in the South, but also a center of politics and of activism. But we all know that the civil rights movement was really seated in Atlanta. And so those things continue to ripple through the present moment. And there's so much that's happening there that I could very well be drawn back to the city where I'm from.
Wow. It's journalism at a new level. And I think that's what I love about podcasting so much, is that I get to hear the writer's voice. And, that's how it started back in the 1980s. It was the writers that created the podcast. It wasn't the comedians.
Yeah. And, I think it is an evolution, and it's one that I'm really enjoying because you do get to step into your voice in the way that you can't really do on the page. You do get to, like I've realized in these last few days with the show being out, that I have expressed myself in a way that I haven't ever done before in my career, in a way that's truer to myself than ever in my career. And I think a lot of that comes with reading my own words. It's a special thing to use your voice.
Oh, it's a gift, man. You've got it down.
As you know.
You got to come back to this show anytime in the future, because I mean, this right here is going to create a lot of conversation, and I hopefully will believe in my heart that it's going to inspire you to do even more podcasting.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I would love to come back.
Excellent. Well, you be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Thank you. You too.